Hello, hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me here in Washington, DC. Just come out of the irradiated metro there into L'Enfant Plaza, so be aware there are super mutants around here because we are in one of the many kind of sections of the city. We're going to talk about the Capitol Post today. So I think it's important, keeping up to date with the news, both local news and worldwide, especially right now. There's a lot going on in the real world right now, and it's getting kind of scary in some situations. Things are getting a bit worrying with international relations and things. And I think there's two important things to keep in mind with the way the news cycle is working at the moment. Firstly, is to look after your mental health. So, things could be happening that could be quite stressful and quite upsetting. So, when you're constantly getting bombarded with breaking news all the time, it's hard when it's happening constantly and every story that comes out is competing for your attention. It can wear you down. So, taking breaks from watching the news, reading the paper, social media, whatever, is a good idea. But the other thing that I think is really important is critical thinking. It's really important to evaluate sources of news and sources of information to make sure that you're not being misled. Research and checking multiple sources where you can. Critical thinking skills and media literacy do seem to be on a bit of a general decline at the moment, and misinformation is so rife right now. And it can be a serious problem. So I think looking at a fictional newspaper and see how things looked in DC before the bombs fell in the Fallout series is going to be quite an interesting example of that. There is some radroaches around here, and then we've got the logo of the Capitol Post. So um, the Capitol Post, it's spelt with both the O and the A in it in different places. So I think on the newspapers that you see on the loading screens, it's got the A, but other places it's got the O. They seem to have switched back and forward between both spellings, but they were a pre-war newspaper, and the offices are found in L'Enfant Plaza in Washington, D.C., which is here. So to get into this place, I had to go through the irradiated metro. It took me 20 minutes because I got lost. The metros are so confusing. But I finally found my way and then came out here at L'Enfant South. There is also L'Enfant Plaza and things, but the Capitol Post is literally right across from the metro when you emerge. So you can come in to this office. There's super mutants outside, but as far as I know, there's only a couple of radroaches in here. I've turned combat off, so we don't really care about the radroaches, so that's fine. And there are some traps dotted about as well, so do bear that in mind when you come in here. But there's also several terminals around where we can have a look at things, and we can read some articles and things. Do bear in mind there is one of these terminals that's a trap one, so you can see the little antenna on it. But we'll talk about the building. So this obviously is the reception desk, and there's a hidden safe here that you can open with this terminal, the receptionist's terminal. And then this is obviously was the office where all the journalists would be writing their articles and all the rest of it. And then we can head downstairs, I think, to pick this lock. Really low in bobby pins in this character. Oh, never mind. It's not that way. There is probably the giant hole in the floor that makes a convenient ramp. So we can come down into the basement. We've got like microfilm readers and things, obviously, for looking at archived issues of the newspaper, and this would be the printing press. So this would be where all the pages were printed. The rest of the building is collapsed. There's another radroach down here, but we also have this guy. So this is Gibson, who's got his head between his legs. There's an eyeball there. So this is Gibson. So there's an interesting thing about him, is that he's got a key here and he's got a scrap of paper, which I'm assuming is some kind of note. Yep. So Gibson actually comes from Minefield. So search the house. So this is a reference. So one of the houses in Minefield, which is his house, has a little tiny model of his house. It's a reference to something, but I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. And you've got the key, so the key lets you get into his house in Minefield. And obviously something happened to him, and this is where he ended up, sadly deceased. And then this would have been the printing room when the newspaper was still active. Obviously, I don't think they're publishing anymore because almost everybody is dead. But I think the interesting thing about this place is that it's kind of a time capsule of, seeing what was reported in the news, how it was reported, and getting an idea of how the public were feeling and how people were feeling in the run up to, the big war where, the world was destroyed. So getting to see, the kind of things that were making the news is very, very interesting. So yeah, you can hack in and you can unlock this little safe beside the reception desk for a few bits and pieces, which is kind of nice. So obviously watch out for the trap terminal, but there's 3 other terminals here that have articles. So we're going to go in kind of chronological order and see what the world looked like before the bombs fell. Unsurprisingly, it's a bit of a mess. So yeah, this is the 2052 top stories. So the first one is about the United Nations being disbanded. So in a crushing blow to foreign relations and world peace, the United Nations yesterday were completely disbanded, leaving its member nations to fend for themselves in these trying times. Many had considered the United Nations the best hope for brokering a ceasefire between the European Commonwealth and the nations of the Middle East, but such an intervention is now impossible. In a somber press conference at the United Nations building in New York City, United Nations President Sakugama Okiri had this to say: "It is a sad day for the United States, sadder still for the world. An era of relative peace and prosperity has come to a tragic end. The resources wars are upon us, and in my humble opinion, the United Nations is needed now more than ever. Sadly, the world disagrees." So those nations that have not already moved out of the immense headquarters will have completely vacated the premises by the end of the week. Several organisations have already begun bidding on the prime real estate, but children's toy retailer Bumbelows seems to be determined to transform the building into their new East Coast superstore. So we kind of knew bits of this. It's been mentioned at several points in the series that when the resource wars began, oil was running out, all the other fossil fuels were running low, so nations were scrambling to get their hands on what was left, and this led to a war between the European Commonwealth, which is basically the equivalent of the European Union currently, and the Middle East over the oil. Big surprise. And it caused collapse across pretty much all of Europe, really. So, when the European Commonwealth fell apart, the European Union, it's a political union of European countries. Not every European country is a member of the EU. So Norway and Switzerland stay out of it, for example. And the UK quite spectacularly left the EU, which I think by all accounts was a very silly move, but we knew that before. It's not really done us any favours here in the UK. But it is one of these things that, having this kind of political union between all these countries, it helped with trade and all kinds of, political things. But this is all fallen apart in the Fallout universe because of the war against the Middle Eastern countries. And this was when the resource wars started. So it'd been going on for, a couple of decades, really, before the bombs actually fell. And, the president of the UN was saying how, it's really quite sad about how this is happening, but all these big corporations are like vultures. They're ready to kind of push in and just take the building and take over the building. Presumably it's in a prime spot in New York City, so everybody wants to kind of jump in as it is. It's like vultures just waiting to rip it apart. While, across the world, alliances are dissolving, Europe's falling apart, the UN nations, and the article, the tone of this article is pushing for a bit of an emotional response, like, oh no, world peace seems like a pipe dream now because European Commonwealth's falling apart, the UN's disbanded, everybody's on their own now, it's every man for themselves kind of thing. So, you know, and making these companies, it does feel like they are criticising the large companies, the capitalists, because they're like vultures ready to pick apart the UN headquarters building, because it's like, oh, well, if the UN's gone, then we want a piece of this really, you know, prime real estate in the middle of New York City. So it's kind of an interesting one there. And, you know, again, war doesn't start the moment that one nation declares war on another. It starts a long time before that, with things like this happening, and, you know, with countries making different decisions. And, you know, it's a lot more complicated than just, we're going to fight you guys, or, you know, just a country deciding to invade another country. You know, there's usually a build up to it, and this is really the build up to the large scale conflict that happened in 2077. But then we have another one, which is the pint sized slasher, More Than a Myth. So this is an interesting little article here, about the pint sized slasher, who was this urban legend of a child sized murderer wearing a clown mask. So I'll read the article because I think it's quite an interesting one. So, what American child alive hasn't heard the story of the pint-sized slasher, that diminutive demon in a clown mask who stalks and slashes the innocent residents of supposedly safe suburbia? It's just one of the many folk stories parents use to scare their youngsters into behaving themselves, or is it? According to Germantown Police Chief Joseph Field, the pint-sized slasher may be more real than many people would like to admit. After reviewing the autopsy results of the Linden Street slayings, we have confirmed that the force and direction of every knife wound are consistent with an attack from a much smaller assailant, a child to be precise. Add to the sinister forensic findings this statement from Christopher Atkinson, the one surviving victim of the adolescent assassin, and it becomes clear that the pint-sized slasher does indeed walk among us. The clown, he's going to kill us all, do you understand me? He stabbed my brother Sean right in the face, he killed my brother, the little clown. But assuming the pint-sized slasher is indeed a real tangible threat to the peace-loving residents of DC suburbia, one question remains: why? What could possibly motivate a child to don a clown mask and murder innocent people in cold blood? We may never know. At least not until the miniature maniac is brought to justice. Until then, all we can do is lock our doors, kiss our children goodnight, and pray they live to see morning. So, the tone of this article is absolutely wild. You know, we've got mention from the police chief about autopsy findings suggesting that the assailant that killed these people was a child-sized person, as well as a eyewitness testimony from the known survivor of this attack. The tone is wild. You know, we've come up with sort of several different names. There's an awful lot of alliteration used, and it's quite dramatic. So it's very sensationalistic. You know, like, oh my god, the pint-sized slasher is real. You need to lock your doors and hope that your children survive. It's terrible. You know, it's really kind of, and making you ask the question if you're really safe. And speculating on the existence of this child murderer, this child serial killer, and speculating about why they would do something like this. It's all very, you know, it's all very interesting, and it seems like a kind of weird thing for the police chief to say, I think, when he said, you know, a child, essentially, it's, you know, it's kind of an assumption that to say it's definitely from, you know, a child. It could be. You know, there's no denying that it could be a child, but it could also be an adult that has dwarfism, for example, something like that. It's a very interesting one, but a lot of it is kind of speculation. We don't really know how many people were killed in this, the Linden Street slayings. There's no mention of who died. But we obviously have the testimony from this one guy that survived. Again, it's not clear whether Christopher is an adult or a child. The words seem kind of childlike, but obviously he's very upset about the situation. Understandable if he did just see his brother murdered right in front of his face. That's going to be traumatic, whatever age you are. But adamant that it was a clown, that there was a clown mask, so he seems quite convinced, and then this dramatic ending about what could possibly motivate a child to don a clown mask and murder innocent people in cold blood. So the journalist was having a lot of fun with word choices here, but it's trying to make people afraid and I think build up some kind of panic. That seems to be the goal here. Like, nobody's safe until we catch this murderer, all that kind of thing. There's a serial killer roaming your neighbourhood, which is obviously something that's going to be quite scary, especially for parents. Um, but it's common for, newspapers and media outlets to dramatise these things sometimes because there's not really a lot of factual information here about the situation. It's focused very much on whether the pint-sized slasher is actually real and did the deed. That's not, it doesn't mention anything about the London Street slayings, who died, how many people were killed. It doesn't really mention much. Christopher's statement is obviously it's marked as a direct quote, but how coherent is he going to be if that's what happened to him? It's but people do love an urban legend, and drama sells papers, and that's something that you do always want to bear in mind when it comes to media, social media as well, and newspapers and things. And obviously most newspapers and TV channels now have things on social media as well. And that's where, you get clickbait from, is people that are, posting something dramatic, posting something that's designed to stimulate an emotional response. That's what they want, because then you're going to click on the article or you're going to buy the paper to read it, and that's how they make their money. So, it is something to bear in mind when it comes to these sources, is that sometimes the reporting isn't exactly reflective of exactly what happened, and sometimes filtering out what's actual fact isn't the easiest thing to do. But we're going to move on 20 years, actually, which is it's baffling that these are the only, I guess all the other computers and archives are broken, but we're on to 2072 now, so things have changed a lot, and definitely not in a good way. So we are now in the Sino-American War, which broke out in 2066 after China invaded Alaska for the oil buried there, which was the last oil on the planet as far as we know. So this terminal's in the kind of northwest corner of the office. So the first article is about the intention to annex China for the sake of national security. Now, I do want to preface this with the fact that this is a fictional story, and any similarities to politicians living or dead is purely coincidental, and opinions expressed are purely based on the fictional story. But something to think about. But this is the situation. So we're over 5 years into the war with China, and the US has been fighting hard to save Alaska. But anybody that knows what North America looks like is that Alaska is not directly connected to the rest of the US. It's stuck on the side of Canada, and there isn't a direct land route. So in order to get ground troops and tanks and whatever into Alaska, they either have to go on ships, which isn't always easy, especially, that close to the Arctic Circle, and also, or so they would have to go through Canada, which means that Canada would have to let them go through Canada. And that was kind of proven to be a bit of a challenge. So I'll read the article here. So, in a move that is being widely viewed as both necessary and overdue, the United States military today declared that they will begin the immediate annexation of the country of Canada. The decision comes after a long and contentious relationship with the Canadian government that began shortly after the Chinese invasion of Anchorage, Alaska in the winter of 2066. The Canadian leadership at the time expressed its opposition to American troops passing through their country or traversing their airspace, but ultimately capitulated. Tensions with our neighbour to the north have only escalated since then, as the United States has found itself relying heavily on Canada's natural resources, including wood cultivated from the country's great timberland forests, to maintain the war effort against China. But it was a recent near sabotage of the Alaskan pipeline that finally tipped the American military's hand. That was the last straw, said Buzz Babcock, that's a name certainly, commander of US forces in Canada. You know what's been stopping the Reds from pouring into downtowns? You know, American soldiers, that's what. And now we've got to worry about someone, Chinese, Alaskan, or otherwise, taking out the pipeline? I don't think so. Effective immediately, I think effective immediately is supposed to be what that says. United States troops are beginning a complete takeover of all Canadian assets and resources. Little America is ours, but let's face it, it always has been. That last line is particularly chilling, to say that, and given the situation in the real world right now, it's interesting. And this is the kind of thing that happens in wartime, is that each side is determined to win at all costs, and so it's a case of we're going to do whatever we have to do to succeed in wartime. But ultimately, people are always going to end up losing something whenever war happens. That's the nature of the beast, unfortunately. So this is the kind of thing. This is what happened. Just a few years before the world ended, because that way, if US owned Canada, then they can send whatever they want through to get to Anchorage, which did ultimately allow them to secure Anchorage from the Chinese and win the war, in quotation marks, because they didn't really win it for long before everything went to hell. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and again, with these countries fighting over the resources, it's causing a breakdown of international relations, which happened in Europe. By this point in the timeline, probably Europe's just who knows what's actually happening over there. We don't really have a lot of information about after the European Commonwealth fell apart and the UN fell apart. But imagine it's just absolute chaos. But again, it's this article, it is kind of framing it. It's quite a long quote from the commander, to kind of indicate, like, it's they're basically trying to justify the actions of the US military. They're justifying, like, we need to do this for the war effort. We need to do this for national security, and they're justifying it because they're protecting Canada from China. So I'll leave that as it is. But I imagine it's something that sounds quite familiar to a lot of people. These are the kinds of things, and yeah, it's an interesting thing to know. Obviously, this game came out in 2008, so and the original game came out in 1997, and we knew from that Canada was annexed by the US. So, a long time ago, but it's funny how life can imitate art at times. But yeah, the next one is a much more hopeful toned article about a new super weapon that the United States Army is developing. So this is a very interesting one. So I'll read the article first and then see if you can guess exactly what this super weapon is going to be. In a startling turnaround from their previous policy of complete covert development, the United States Army has confirmed that they are indeed working on a new superweapon, one designed specifically to crush the Red Chinese invasion force and liberate occupied Anchorage, Alaska, once and for all. Speaking at an Army press conference at the Pentagon, General Konstantin Chase stated, "No more secrets. The time has come to lay all our cards on the table so the Chinese can see with their own eyes that we've got the winning hand. United States Army is proud to announce that for the first time in history, General Atomics International and ROBCO have joined forces to create, for this great country, a super weapon that will leave every single yellow-bellied Red shaking in their commie booties." Unfortunately for our readers, that's as specific as Chase is willing to get. While he and the Army are ready for China to know that the US is developing a new weapon, they're not quite ready to divulge just what it is, or when it will be ready for deployment. All in due time, all in due time. Rest assured, when this weapon is complete, liberty will come to Anchorage and hell will follow. So, if you haven't already guessed what it is, it's Liberty Prime. That's what he's talking about. So, we know that ROBCO and General Atomics were involved in the development of Liberty Prime, but they obviously don't want to announce to the public we're making a giant doom robot because they don't want the Chinese leaders to know exactly what it is, but they want, it's an intimidation tactic almost, we're developing this super weapon that's going to win the war for us and kick the Chinese out. They want China to know that they have something, but they don't want them to know what it is, because if you know what it is, then they can prepare for it and they can do something to counter it. So, it's I know something you don't know, I've got something up my sleeve. So, if you back down, then you won't have to make us use it, kind of thing. That's what this is. But it's also intended to kind of make the public feel more hopeful, because at this point, we're like 5-6 years into the war with China at this point. So, war weariness is becoming a problem. People are tired that things are difficult because the US is spending so much money on their military campaigns, on R&D and all this kind of thing, as well as investing in vault tech to build all the vaults to save people because of the nuclear war and that kind of thing. So it's not a surprise that they want to kind of bring something hopeful, and it gives them, this ability to bring hope to the American people, but also to potentially intimidate their enemies, by saying that they've got something up their sleeves that's going to sort them out once and for all, kind of thing. Because remember, obviously the TV show is hinting that the death clause were involved in the eventual win at Anchorage. But the accepted narrative, I think, for the public was it was the power armor that did it. Liberty Prime obviously was never deployed. He had those pesky power problems that couldn't be solved in time, so he was kind of put into storage in the Pentagon, and that's where the Brotherhood of Steel discovered him. So as far as the public's aware, it seems to be largely the bravery of the American soldiers and the power armor that did the trick. But the TV show hints at the death clause. But bear in mind, the death clause were not the kind of thing that they would want the public to know existed, because they're terrifying. So even if the death, there's no official confirmation that the death clause were deployed in the game. That doesn't mean they weren't. It just means that it wasn't recorded that they were. But governments hide stuff like that all the time. So it's entirely plausible that the death clause were deployed and it was covered up. To keep that secret, that's what did the trick, especially because if they couldn't fully control the death clause, maybe there was some friendly fire happened or something, and they obviously didn't want people to know that. So it's an interesting one, but it's a promise, like, we're working on something, we're going to turn the tide, and that's going to improve public opinion. So that's obviously the goal with this article, as well as potentially trying to intimidate the Chinese. Didn't work very well, unfortunately, but here we are. So we're now at the most recent stories that are available to us in this final terminal here, which is 2077, so January. So this is 10 months before the bombs fell, and whatever they did, they won. So Commies crushed, Alaska's been liberated. So in the late evening hours of January 10th, brave American Army forces launched an all-out offensive against the entrenched Chinese Communist invaders in the beleaguered seaport of Anchorage, Alaska, destroying all opposition and finally liberating the city after more than 10 years of Chinese occupation. No red-blooded American can ever forget that terrible winter of 2066 when Chairman Cheng's commie cutthroats mercilessly invaded the icy extension of the United States in an unprecedented act of foreign aggression that sent shockwaves all the way back to our nation's capital. But the nightmare is finally over, and America, always the home of the brave, is once again the land of the free. So that's nice. It's very dramatic language again, but obviously, again, making people aware, like, that's it, the war's over, everything's going to be great again, we're going to get back to normal life. It's going to be fantastic. So it's fairly standard, wartime reporting, I suppose, after a win, essentially. And, making sure that everyone knows how terrible the commie cutthroats were to invade in the first place, but the brave American soldiers have solved the problem, so everything's going to be great. I wonder how Canada's feeling about that. But yeah, it's it's an interesting one. But that's it. So obviously the feeling was, we've taken Anchorage back. The Chinese are gone. War's over. Everything's fantastic. Unfortunately, that proved to not be the case, as we know. So yeah, and then you can see that things aren't great. Because the next article, food riots, royal feds. This is my favourite one actually. Because it's a wild read. So talking about food riots, so people are protesting about the lack of food. They're obviously struggling to feed their families and keep things together. There's a lot of social unrest with jobs being lost and things like that in the run up to the bombs. So it's important to bear that in mind, that just because they've liberated Anchorage doesn't mean that everything's perfect. There's hyperinflation going on, and people were losing jobs to robots, and all these kinds of things were happening. So, people were struggling to make ends meet. They were struggling to put food on the table and pay their bills and things like that, and quite rightfully are upset about that situation. So this is the statement from the White House on that. So it would appear that Washington's tolerance for American social disorder has finally reached its breaking point. In a recent public statement, White House spokesman Warren Eccleston said, "Okay, Americans are hungry, we get it. Well, I've got news for you. Things are tough all over, people. The president himself has been forced to substitute cube steak for his nightly prime rib, and the only wine available is a detestable Chateau Montrose 2043. But does he whine? Does he take to the streets like a rabid red? So please, good people, please, wait in line, get your food, and then go home. We're Americans. We do not solve our problems with violence." Marie Antoinette could never. She actually never said that thing about letting them eat cake. But anyway, this is so out of touch. That poor president eating cube steak and drinking a substandard wine, and he's not complaining. He's taking it on the chin, so everybody else needs to as well. It's just, it's so out of touch. And this whole thing, like when, that kind of one-upping and like everybody's struggling just now, blah, 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 that drives me nuts. Like some people have it worse. You should be grateful for what you have. You should be happy you don't have cancer. Stop complaining. When people are losing their jobs left and right, and to robots and corporate nonsense, hyperinflation is happening. People can't feed their families. People can't pay their bills. People are going to be upset about that, and a public statement like this is not going to help the situation. By telling them that they should be grateful for what they get. It's just it's very much out of touch, and I think showing that they don't really care that much about the common man on the ground, and the people that are facing financial ruin because of all these things. And the war would have had a big impact on the economy as well, because it always does go into war, especially when it was such a long stalemate. That went on for over 10 years with neither side making progress, before the Americans finally kind of did it. So it's, and that's going to cause a lot of issues, because it is going to affect the economy, and that's going to affect how people pay their bills and pay for basic necessities. And I think it's always interesting to read and evaluate news reports. So, reading what's in the paper, but also looking at the language that's used, and sort of trying to read between the lines a little bit to see what are you getting. Is this opinion? Is it facts? How accurate are the facts? All these kinds of things, and especially in times of kind of upheaval and conflict. And I do believe that as a society, we are at risk of losing media literacy and critical thinking skills. It does seem to be more and more difficult sometimes to filter out the misinformation and to notice when what you're getting is a biased opinion, and that kind of thing. Where people are expressing an opinion or a belief as fact, when it's not a fact necessarily, it's what they believe or what they think. And people decide that what they think is right and everybody else is wrong. And it's something that social media and generative AI like ChatGPT are a big part of this. The fact that people are using ChatGPT as a search engine is just baffling to me. And it is a big part of it because anyone can post anything on the internet and state it as fact. I could sit here and tell you that the sky is green, and if I'm convincing enough, and provide enough, Photoshop pictures showing how green the sky is, I could probably start a movement where people are determined to say that the sky is green. I mean, that's a kind of silly example. It's a bit hyperbolic, but you know what I mean is that, like, if someone sounds authoritative enough and is convincing enough, people are going to believe it without questioning anything, and that is something that can be a problem because when someone tells you something, you want to know, why are they telling me this? What is their goal in telling me this? Like, what are they trying to achieve with it? And ChatGPT, like, I know probably people are going to come for me about this because I despise generative AI. I don't want AI to write my books for me. I want AI to wash my dishes for me and do housework for me so that I can just write my books. I don't want that kind of thing. And it's really, really a problem in the art space and the literature space. But people are using it as a search engine, and it's literally been proven that it just makes things up. It literally makes things up. And you can't trust anything that it tells you. You just can't use it as a reliable source of information. I mean, when I was at sort of university, we were told that Wikipedia wasn't a good enough source. But Wikipedia is better than some things because it at least expects you to actually, cite your sources and to there's a verification process for things that are put on Wikipedia. ChatGPT doesn't have that. It just makes things up if it doesn't have the answer for you. So you can't trust it. But more than that is that word choice and tone make a big difference to how things are perceived. It makes a huge impact when you are writing or speaking publicly about something. So, using sensationalistic language and playing on people's fears and emotions is very convincing because, despite how far humans have advanced, to a point we are still controlled by our emotions. We do have emotional responses to things, and oftentimes we need to sit and unpack that, and it's not an easy thing to do. And I do tend to avoid talking about real world politics on here, especially given the tension on the international stage at the moment. But I, whatever you believe and whatever kind of political stance you take, it is very, very important to ensure that you're evaluating information for accuracy, especially on social media, because people post inflammatory things to make money from the attention. Rage baiting is so rife on social media, and because people can monetize their social media, the more attention they get, the more money they make. So people are doing that. They're deliberately posting something that they know is going to make people angry so that they can make money off it. And sometimes it's fitness influencers that are standing in supermarkets yelling at bottles of seed oil and telling you how it's going to kill you and your family and your dog. So you need to buy their ridiculously expensive supplement to balance your hormones, and stuff like that. But it's people that can command an authoritative voice and have some charisma, and that are able to basically manipulate people's emotions to convince them to do things or to buy things usually. So it is very important to think about stuff like that. So I say it's something that I think is really important, and the articles that we see in this newspaper office really do kind of clue us into that. So when you are watching the news and social media or you're reading the news, there's a few things to think about. Ask what they're really saying and look at who it is that's saying it, and why they might be saying it. What's their agenda? What's their aim with saying what they're saying? If they're making a claim of something, have they got proof to back it up? Do they have data? Do they have evidence? Is it facts that they're giving you, or is it an opinion piece? Are they trying to induce some kind of emotion? Do they want you to feel hopeful? Do they want you to feel angry? Do they want you to feel scared? Is there another perspective to be considered on a situation? And that's going to make sure that you are properly informed. Propaganda is a common tool of politics, among other things. And it's scary how easily people can be fooled by it. Even people who think that they are above it and they can't be influenced can fall for propaganda. And it's used all the time because it works. So, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to seek other sources and fact check things. And that's something that I think people are forgetting to do and forgetting how to do. And not everybody wants to be educated or informed. Some people do like to go into these things just because they want to be angry about something. But I think you have to be aware of what politicians and the media and people in the public eye are trying to do, and if they're trying to manipulate you. Not everyone's pushing an agenda, but some people definitely are. So being smart about it and paying attention can really help to make sure that you're not being misinformed and being misled. And these articles show some of this. If you look at the language that's chosen and the quotes that were picked by the journalists, obviously these journalists don't really exist, and these articles were written by the game writers, but they are written in a way that you would see in a real newspaper. It's very much the same kind of style and tone that real journalists used. Um, and every word that goes into a newspaper article, so I'm studying copywriting as part of my sort of career shift, if you will. And every word that goes into a newspaper article is chosen specifically and carefully, because you tend to have limited space, especially on the printed page. So you need to get everything across in as few words as possible, as well as having, quotes and things. So every single word that goes into these articles is chosen specifically for a reason. So that's something that's important to think about. And honesty can be a bit iffy in these things as well. So, something to bear in mind. And the headlines are designed to grab your attention as well. But, the news media can be biased in some way. And we do see that, I can tell which newspapers in the UK are right wing versus left wing, and you can see the difference in the way things are written and the way headlines are written and things. And I think it's very important to try and filter that and figure out what the actual truth is that's underlying it all, before you decide exactly how you feel about it. And to keep in mind that when things are difficult, when there is tension, when there is problems, emotions tend to run high, and that means that the truth and the facts can get buried. And unfortunately, some people, that's what they want. So I thought I would leave you today, because I know this has been kind of a heavy topic, and I say I don't like talking too much about politics, real world politics on here, because I know that's an issue. But from an objective standpoint, there's a lot happening right now, and I don't know where it's going to go. But I think remembering to stay, critically thinking about things and making sure that you are evaluating the information that people are giving you for accuracy and for intent. So here's a quote. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. And that comes from 1984 by George Orwell. Highly recommend reading George Orwell's stuff. I actually just got the on Audible yesterday, the audiobook version of basically everything that George Orwell ever wrote, because I have been meaning to reread Animal Farm and 1984. But yeah, I thought I would leave you with that quote, and you can decide for yourself. As always, I do love to hear from you guys in the comments, but given that, we're touching on politics and potential real life issues, keep that in mind. Keep it nice and respectful. I'm all right for debate and discussion, but we're going to be polite. We're going to be respectful to people that may have a different opinion. And Let me know what you think, and we'll catch you guys on Thursday with the episode 6 of the TV show. I cannot wait. I want to know what happens next. This waiting a week for every episode is a lot. So I'll catch you guys then. Bye.